Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Native Plant Identification Training with Community Nature Connection. Happy to have everybody joining us this afternoon. Hopefully you're all in the right place. We're going to be talking about native plants and learning how to identify them today. My name is Celeste, and I'm the Training Institute Manager with Community Nature Connection. I'm really excited to have everybody joining us. As we welcome participants and our guests today, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So if you would like to share in the chat box, go ahead and type us your name, let us know where you're joining us from, where in the world, and whether you're affiliated with an organization or not. Give us a shout out in the chat box and we will get right into it. So thanks again for being here. This is a training brought to you by Community Nature Connection. We are a community-based organization based in Los Angeles, and our mission is to increase access to the outdoors for diverse communities. We do so in partnership with the communities that we serve. And this training is a part of the Training Institute, which is a Community Nature Connection program. The Training Institute aims to increase access to training opportunities in the naturalist and outdoor fields. So thanks so much for being here this afternoon. If you're just joining us, please take a moment, introduce yourself in the chat box, your name and where you're joining us from, and if you're affiliated with an organization. And we're excited to get started. I'm going to turn it over to our trainer today. Julio Soria is a naturalist and the Youth Leadership Programs Manager with Community Nature Connection, and he's going to be leading us this afternoon. So take it away, Julio.
Awesome, thank you, Celeste. Really cool to see everybody in the chat box. Hello to some partners, Natural History Museum, awesome. Always great to see you. California Science Center, LECC, Los Angeles Conservation Corps, awesome. Sorry if I missed some of them. Oh, cool, we got friends from the Tataviam. Awesome, well, cool. Happy that you all made it today. And just excuse me as I share my screen. All right, whoa. We'll get started. Again, my name is Julio Soria. I am the Youth Leadership Programs Manager. So as Celeste mentioned, I cover a lot of our youth programming that encompasses workforce development. So not only do we get a lot of youth from underserved communities into the outdoors, but we really work with a lot of community partners such as National Park Service, Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority, Natural History Museum, LA Zoo, and so many other amazing institutions to expose them to careers. And then we offer a lot of professional development and training to get these youth into those positions. And so that's just like a small little bit of what I do, and I love it. It's awesome. So cool, today I will be talking about identifying native plants. Native plants are a big passion of mine. I'm a big nerd when it comes to the local flora in the mountains. So this program today is in support partially through a grant from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. So just want to give them a shout out. This program is also in partnership with the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. And so we're all gathered here because we all have varying degrees of interest in connecting to nature. You know, a lot of us are professionals, and a lot of you may also just be folks who enjoy getting out. And so, you know, we all get out for a variety of reasons. Some of us may get out for exercise, sometimes to de-stress, or even just to connect with the local flora and fauna or sometimes it's all of it. So for me, as a lifelong enthusiast of just hiking and being in nature, I've really taken an interest and a liking to the local flora. And there's still a lot of things that I'm learning about just the world of the natural world, the ecosystem, and just all the flora and fauna. And anytime I knew something new or discover something new on the trail, it's like always just so amazing and awesome. And that's why I enjoy both recreating and working out in the field on the trail. And so having an understanding of the local flora really makes a hike a lot more interesting and enjoyable. And I think that you'll learn that discovering native plants through proper identification methods will enrich your hiking experience. So today you will learn a few botanical terms and how to identify some common native species just by looking at their physical features. So first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge Western nations and empires have exploited natural resources and indigenous knowledge for centuries. Plants known and used by indigenous peoples were discovered by colonial botanists. And as the indigenous knowledge was appropriated, the people and culture remain invisible. Some knowledge has been passed on without credit, while other knowledge has been suppressed or lost. We must honor these invisible voices who stewarded the lands of Mother Earth and passed on knowledge of the flora. So I acknowledge and honor past, present, and emerging elders of the Chumash, Tataviam, and Tongva for their stewardship of this land and for passing on sacred knowledge of plants. All right, so let's get into some plant terms. So botany is the science that is concerned with the study of a plant. And plants are defined as, they're exemplified by trees, shrubs, herbs, grasses, ferns, and mosses. These are organisms that are creating their energy, their sustenance through the process of photosynthesis using chlorophyll. And we won't get too heavy into the botany, but we are just talking about mostly vascular plants. So we're not going to be talking about algae, which is a protist. Excuse me. Plants are extremely important. They provide so many services. First and foremost, they're producing oxygen. Without plants, most life, if not all life, wouldn't survive. We need oxygen. We need to breathe fresh oxygen. They're also just the base of most food chains on planet Earth. So they're taking the radiant energy from the sun, converting that into sugars, and really everything. We are very much dependent on them for that. Speaking of food, just as human society, agriculture is really what propelled our civilization, and it's a big part of the workforce on the planet. We all need to eat, we all need to grow food, and other services, they help with retaining soils, preventing erosion. They also just provide a lot of these, what we call, they have an intrinsic value. Just you can't quantify their value or really put a dollar sign of what they're doing. Just beyond all of these services, they also just beautify our communities, and just looking at them is just relaxing and amazing, and just makes life special, I feel. So plants are awesome. So today the program is focusing on proper identification. And identification is important for a lot of reasons. So, the reason we've put on this training today is because via the survey sent out, a lot of folks shared that they were interested in learning how to identify plants. And, it is a bit of a skill that you can easily develop. And so here I have examples of Toyon, which is a native shrub. and pyracantha, which is the non-native. And so one of the MRCA parks that you can visit is Franklin Canyon Park. It is in Beverly Hills. It's a really family-friendly park and just very friendly for people of all abilities. There are, very flat and paved paths and trails that are easy to moderate. A lot of them are under a mile, under like shade. So they're great for parents with toddlers, parents with a stroller, folks who may be in a wheelchair. It's a really great park where everyone can enjoy nature, and there's steeper trails, there's flat trails, and it's a great. It has a great example of a lot of the plant communities that exist in our local area and in the Santa Monica Mountains. And so I'm bringing up Franklin Canyon because Franklin Canyon's because of its close proximity to the city, there are inevitably species that have been introduced either purposefully or not on purpose. And so right here I have these two plants that exist in Franklin Canyon Park, and it is again the Toyon, the native, and then pyracantha, the non-native. And so the pyracantha is an ornamental plant. I'm not sure exactly how it was introduced to the park, but it is something that people use in their gardens as a hedge. So it is likely that birds could have brought it in. And I like to use this as a great example when I'm either leading a training with our naturalists in training, the youth for my programs, or when I'm like, for example, if I'm doing like a risk management training, because this plant, it is, I wouldn't say it's a toxic, but there's different accounts of it. But I guess in essence, if you consume too much of these berries, they can be unsettling to your stomach. And so, yeah, this plant originates from Southwest Europe and Asia, and so it's not something that has evolved here. So it's in the park, and potentially it can be bad for your stomach if you ingest it. Well, the toyon is an edible, and if you were taking one of our ethnobotanical programs or learning about native cultures, and you would learn that the toyon is a great winter food for not only the for the fauna, but also for people. And so if we were, if a naturalist was leading a class and potentially doing a sampling in edibles and they didn't properly identify this plant, they could be really misinforming the public, and, potentially someone could ingest something that they shouldn't. And so, upon just a quick glance to the untrained eye, it's very easy to see why these plants can be mistook for one another. But learning these plant terms and learning how to properly identify structures of the plants, the shapes, and all of that is a great way to be able to identify plants. So we will jump into how you can build your plant identification skills. So first and foremost, use your senses. One of my favorite programs to do on the trail is like a quote unquote 4 or 5 senses hike, depending on the group and the situation. We don't do taste, but look around. Look at the plant size, the shape, the general growth habit, its pattern. I've been doing this for so many years now that like when I'm in traffic, I'll be like in traffic and I'm just like looking at all the weeds growing on the side, and just by like knowing their general features, I can say, oh look, there's some mallow, there's some horseweed, there's some mustard, there's some arundo or some castor bean growing on the side. And I get really excited when I see like a sumac or some other native species growing on the side of the freeway. So learning just the general characteristics, like zooming in and zooming out, just kind of what does the plant look like from far away, and then getting more up closer and learning about what the plant looks like up close. So looking at the leaf size, the shape, the color, the texture, the arrangement. When plants are flowers, learning about flower types, colors, and arrangement, and then seeds. Also learning about their seeds and seed pods. Those are like a few flowers and seeds are more advanced, and that's something that we'll be covering in our California Naturalist course. This is a sample of that, so I will not be covering those. Next, the other sense is touch. And so, always touching with care, not harming the plants, but some leaves are fuzzy, some are smooth. Some plants can be sticky or leathery, such as like the sticky monkey flower. All of them have different adaptations for retaining moisture in our warm climate. And some can have stiff or flexible stems. The sense of smell, I mean, if I had to have a favorite smell, I think it's between petrichor, the smell of like, fresh rain on the earth, or like, I don't know if it's a technical smell, but just the smell of the chaparral, like hiking in the hills and just smelling that like bouquet of just like all the aromatic plants like up in the air is amazing. There's like nothing else like it. So I just love that smell. But yeah, a lot of these plants in our plant communities just have an amazing smell, from the sages, all of the buckwheats, and all these other herbs and shrubs. A lot of them have these amazing, unique aromas, and some of them have a very distinct smell that I would be able to identify just on the smell. Finally, taste. So I guess the disclaimer is here. The disclaimer is never taste a plant, and certainly always abide by posted park rules. Depending on the park that you're in, you cannot pick or harvest any of these plants. Certainly for us, through our partnership with the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, we do have permission to utilize plants in small quantities for educational purposes, and we only do that in special circumstances. It's not something that we do often, definitely not something that we do on public programs. So an example would be like maybe if we're doing a wilderness survival course with a specific group, and only under supervised conditions, with professionals who have properly identified the plants. And finally, listening. You can listen to the rustling of leaves. Those can be hints and indicators of plants. You can, the other thing is, why are these all number ones? Because they're all important. So hike and choose a sit spot throughout the year, every season. Yeah, I mean, yes, we do have seasons in Los Angeles, and either A, choose a loop. So I will recommend Temescal Canyon Park, which is on the coast, right off of PCH. It has a loop hike. It has a lot of the plant communities that are also represented there. I like Temescal, but because you're not getting a lot of introduced species, and it also just offers an amazing view of the coast. And so all the natives that I'll speak on today are plants that you can see along that trail at Temescal Gateway Park. But yeah, choose a trail that you want, and just hike it throughout the year. Really pay attention to the seasonal changes. If you want, select a sit spot and just sit there throughout the year and really notice what the plants are doing. Are they like going through a complete life cycle and then completely dying? Are they, staying, or are they sticking around but changing? Are they not really doing much? Do they lose all their leaves? All of that will help you to build those skills. Use a nature journal for observations. And so we've covered nature journaling in the past, and nature journaling is a really great way to really build and hone your observational skills. It just makes you slow down and really take note of what's going on. And by learning some of the terms that I'll cover today, they'll help you make accurate observations. The other thing you can do is carry a field guide. That could either be like a laminated, like one of those fold-up laminated guides you carry easily in your backpack, or it could be a book, or even like something that you carry on a phone that just has like a lot of the plants. You can also carry you should carry a camera / smartphone to take pictures. So later on, and make sure you take good quality pictures, and you can like either go home and do some research and find out what it was that you saw. And then finally, use those pictures in conjunction with an app or a web to make proper identification. And so I will be talking, iNaturalist is like the obvious app. It's amazing. I'll talk a little bit about that and later on. So those are all resources and things that you can do to start to build your identification skills. All right, so we're jumping into some terms. And so generally speaking, so plants can be divided up into annual and perennial. For all my gardeners out there, it's just good to know a lot of these terms. It just helps you to both understand your plants better and like how to care for them, especially for my all the vegetable gardeners out there. You know the difference between an annual and a perennial. So an annual is a plant that completes its life cycle in one growing season. So that means, you know, it sprouts from its seed, it grows, it flowers, it gives off fruit, and then dies. So lettuces, a sunflower, like, you know, that basil that you have in your windowsill, those are all annual plants. And then a perennial is basically a long-lived plant, having a life cycle that lasts more than 2 years. So that could be like the rosemary, for example, or it could be a giant sequoia. And we also have somewhere like in between are like biennial plants. These are plants that essentially go through their life cycle, but it takes 2 years to complete. So an example of that would be like a kale in the garden. Kale has that type of life habit or cycle. Next are herbaceous versus woody plants. So herbaceous plants are vascular plants that have, they don't really have any woody parts to them. Now, a woody plant is, you know, they have hard stems and the buds survive above the ground. And so 3 examples are essentially trees, shrubs, and some woody vines. Poison oak would be an example of a woody vine. And grapes as well. Grapes are a woody vine. Then we have a shrub versus a tree. This one is, you know, one that's common for people to confuse. It's understandable. And there are definitely species out there that kind of like straddle the line of, are they a shrub, are they a tree? And sometimes when maintained in the landscape, a lot of these native species can be made to look like a tree. But a tree or a shrub is essentially woody and has a lot of main branches that are coming up from the trunk or from the base. Whereas a tree is like a woody perennial with like one main like elongated stem or trunk. So there's a lot of different definitions for trees beyond that, like narrow and wider definitions. Like it could be like something that's used for lumber and has like these huge supporting branches, or it could be like, you know, trees are defined by a height, or even just tall plants that could include palm trees, bananas, bamboo. It's like, so trees is just like a big general term. It's not like it's not a taxonomic group. So they're just really awesome tall plants. You know, they're dominating the canopy. They're up at the mid to top level of canopy, just trying to get all that sunlight. Then we have evergreen and deciduous, and this is important. So evergreen is basically a plant that has green leaves year-round. So that is very much the case for a lot of our native species, but essentially also all the ornamentals that you see planted throughout the Los Angeles basin. Just because of our amazing Mediterranean climate, we can grow plants year-round from not only the Mediterranean, but tropical and subtropical climates, and you know, most plants thrive here. So we really don't get a lot of those fall colors, and we don't get plants that shed their leaves. So an evergreen is just a plant that is pretty much green and has their leaves throughout the year. Deciduous is a plant, so kind of thinking of like the East Coast. So those are those plants that shed their leaves in the autumn. And so here in the Santa Monica Mountains, Los Angeles, San Gabriel Mountains, we have some drought deciduous trees, or plants, I should say. And so what that means is that in the hot months, summer, they will shed and drop most, if not all, of their leaves as an adaptation to deal with little water. And so, so for us, not as opposed to the winter and the summer, you may see some of these plants that are bare because that is their adaptation to deal with lack of water in our climate. And there's herbaceous annual versus herbaceous perennial. And a great and awesome example of this is essentially the California poppy. These are plants that can grow either of two ways. They basically germinate from seed, go through their entire life cycle, and then die. And then the next generation also grows from seed. But the plant, the root survives under the ground, and the plant can pop up again the next year. And so it has those two different ways that it can grow. So if you have poppies in your landscape, once they die, don't pull them out, just leave them, and odds are they'll return. And you have native versus non-native. So native is a plant that has naturally evolved in the ecosystem. And so that's what I'll be focusing on today. Non-native is, non-native, invasive. These are all other terms that we hear from time to time. And so the difference is a non-native species is a plant that has been introduced and it's basically naturalized. So it's surviving in the ecosystem, but it's not considered a detriment to the environment that it's been introduced, and sometimes it's even a benefit. And so a good example of this is horehound. It's an herb in the mint family, and it came from Europe. And you'll see it growing both in Temescal, Franklin Canyon, and so many of our parks in the Santa Monica Mountains. But it basically grows just in harmony, like with all of its other plants and neighbors. It's not necessarily trying to outcompete the plants for space or nutrients or water, and they do not spread aggressively. And so that would be an example of a non-native. And then invasive versus noxious weeds. These are just more like, I guess, terms that are issued by institutions. So like an invasive species is something that's been introduced. It's pretty aggressive, and it outcompetes the native species for like water, nutrients, space. The label is usually attached to plants that are who have a negative impact on the environment that they're introduced into. So big ones that we see in our area are the mustard, the pampas grass, eucalyptus, and these are all the major contributors to the fuel loads in the mountains. So all these intense wildfires that we're experiencing, aside from climate change, just these introduced species are a big part of that complicated puzzle piece. Arundo is another one of those plants that we see just choking the creeks in a lot of our parks. And then a noxious weed is just another one of these species that just also has a really detrimental, has those detrimental properties, both to the environment, to animals, to cattle, to people. And a great example of that would be the castor bean, which we see in a lot of our parks. You see it a lot in the urban environment, along the freeways. Very toxic to both people and pets and wildlife, and they're pretty aggressive. and just like the mustard and the arundo and the like the pampas grass, they're usually the first plants to pop up after a fire in disturbed areas. So we'll get into plant parts. So for the purpose of today's training, I'm focusing on leaves. And so leaves are awesome. They come in huge, they're very diverse in their shapes and sizes and textures and colors. Leaves are basically they're like the powerhouse of the tree, the plant. They are where photosynthesis is happening. And they're basically a flat green blade that is attached either directly to the stem of a plant or the stalk of a plant. So this would be a stalk. So leaves come in arrangements. So the arrangements are alternate, opposite, and whorled. Alternate means only having one leaf or branch protruding from each node. So nodes on a plant are basically these little like joints, if you will, where things grow out of. You could have a branch growing out of a node. You could have leaves growing out of a node. And so here you can see that alternate spacing of the leaves growing out of every little node. You have the opposite arrangement, and that's where you have the two leaves protruding from, kind of sticking out from those nodes. So you see the nodes on here, on this, and then you have the leaves sticking out on every end. And then you have this whorled pattern, and that could be anything from leaves to flower petals. And basically it's like you've got this kind of circular pattern, and they're just kind of radiating out from the axis of like what is typically your the stem or the stalk of the specimen. You see how they're popping out. So that's the arrangement of the leaf. Then we get into the type. So then it breaks down. You got the simple leaves and you got compound leaves. And simple leaf is just a single leaf which doesn't divide into leaflets. So if you see right here, this is one leaf. This is also one leaf. And you may look at this and see like, oh wait, no, that's like a bunch of different leaves together, but it's actually one leaf. These are both one single leaf. So these are called, each little part is called a leaflet, but they're still, but it's still one leaf. And so here's an example of the simple leaf, and then you've got your compound. So they have distinct parts or leaflets joined at the center along the stem. And so then you have palmate and pinnate. Palmate, just think of like the palm of your hand. They typically just look like an open palm. Pinnate, they look more like more of that like palm frond. They just think of a palm tree. And so this is so while this is the well, I'll jump into the next slide. That's better. So here's a close-up of a compound leaf. And so imagine this being the stem. This whole part that the leaves are, this part right here between the stem and the leaves is called the petiole. And then the terminology changes once leaves are growing off of that structure, and that's called the rachis. And so palmate and pinnate, palmate, all of the leaflets are radiating out from the center of the rachis, whereas pinnate, they're growing along it. And then, those variations can change. So you can see how here is the rachis, and these leaflets are growing out in an arrangement, whereas in the palmate, they're all kind of radiating out from a central point or axis. Leaves come in a ton of different shapes. I won't get into all of them, but a lot of what we see in our areas, we see the elliptic. That's basically a plant that is widest at the center, and then it tapers off more or less equally at the top and end of the leaf. Then you have down here the lanceolate, And this is a common shape that we see in the Santa Monica Mountains in our chaparral species. And it's usually 3 to 4 times longer than it is broad. They're usually like whiter down below. And they taper a bit at the tip. So examples of this could be like Yerba Santa, or even the Yucca, for example. And then lyrate, we see this also. Lyrate is basically, it's a lobed plant with the terminal segment, which is like the end opposite of the segment that connects to the stem or the stalk. It's like more rounded and large and lobed. And then you have like, it kind of just, the lobes get smaller as you get closer. And so just think of like kale. Kale is a good example of a lyrate shape. And then we have oblong. This is another shape that we see. And this is oblong is usually 2 to 4 times longer than it is wide. And the sides are parallel or nearly parallel. So as you can see with a lot of these other shapes, they do not have parallel sides, but oblong also has parallel sides. We do get a few leaves that are ovovate. You see this in like our coast-life oak, for example, and they're more like either rounded, paddle-shaped. Sometimes they're narrow at the bottom. And then the ovate egg shape. This is another common leaf pattern that we'll see, and they're more wider towards the middle and end. So once we've gotten into leaf shape, then you get into the margin. And so basically the margin is the boundary or the edge of the leaf. And they come in a ton of different varieties. They can get really complicated. And so, but the basic is entire. So here you'll see number 1. And entire is that the entire margin is smooth and uniform, completely connected. Think of like a ficus leaf, that's just one smooth edge. I can't think of any native plant that comes to mind at the moment that has an entire profile or margin. And then tooth, we see a lot of this in a lot of our species. So basically tooth margins they have like these little indentations and notches. And then that breaks down into like all of these like sub margins of varying degrees of being toothed. You got double, coarsely, crenate, incised, number 9. This is these are like deeply or like notched divisions here, and just think of like a dandelion, for example. So knowing all the margins is important for both properly identifying and then making those observations on your journal. Finally, just some things that can throw you off. Browse. Browse is basically signs after an animal has been foraging on a plant. So maybe there was a caterpillar or a deer or something that was chewing on something. And to the untrained eye, it may seem like, oh, why are all these different leaves like different, or like the shapes are super random? So that's something that might throw you off, because you wouldn't, if you're not, if you see like a leaf that's been chewed on by a caterpillar, for example, and to the untrained eye, you may not know that this has been chewed on and this is just like oddly shaped. Also, disease can sometimes impact the appearance of leaves, depending on what the diseases are. They can give them, leaves can wrinkle up, or they can have, spots, and they can change color. Galls. Galls are really interesting. That's like a whole nother program on its own. But basically, there are species of wasps that all of them reproduce by creating these little structures. And generally speaking, every species of plant and tree, usually it plays host to different species of wasps. But yeah, they'll irritate the tissues of their host plant, and then these little structures will grow on them. And so this is a gall on a type of a valley oak, and they're really pretty. They look like pink coral to me, and to even to like a seasoned naturalist, if you see this, you might be, well, what kind of structure and what's the purpose of this? Is this a flower? Is this a fruit? So those are some other things to look out for that can throw you off. And finally, like other factors, if the plant is deficient in nutrients, the colors could be off. The leaves may not be at their full health and vigor. Also, where the plant is growing. I know mugwort, for example, it looks very different when it's in a sunnier spot as opposed to when it's in a really shady spot. And the leaves are more broad, or they're more compact and narrow, just depending on the site. So there's a lot of fun different variables that are out there that could also make identification trickier. And so now I'll get into just the native species. All these species that I'll be talking about today can be found at Temescal Canyon and a lot of the other parks in the Santa Monica Mountains. I've also included both their scientific name as well as I've tried to include their names in the different indigenous languages, various languages. So I was able to find the names in various languages, and so what I was able to find, I've shared. And so a big shout out to both Genealogy Museum and our partners at the Tataviam tribe for sharing resources on the names of these plants. So this is Toyon. It is a evergreen shrub, so that means it's green year-round. This is what Hollywood gets its name from. These, they're covering all of the Santa Monica Mountains and the hills, and so to people, these look like holly leaves, and so that's where the name came from. And so the leaves, they're oblong, and they the texture. So if you remember oblong, they're a lot longer than they are wider, and they kind of taper towards each end. And their texture can be leathery. They are their margins are toothed. So if you, I would love if we were on the trail and we could really look at these closely. So if you were able to get up and close with these plants, you would see that these margins are toothed. And leaves are usually 2 to 3 inches long. They're typically darker green on top and lighter green underneath. In the summer, the plant has like these small little white flowers, and the fruit comes later on and ripens in the winter. And so that's a really cool thing about this plant is it is a foodstuff for our local fauna, and is a food source for the indigenous. So that is Toyon. What happened here? Okay. Our next up is Yerba Santa, and Yerba Santa is also an evergreen shrub. These typically grow 3 to 5 feet tall. They grow in really sunny locations on hillsides. They like the really sandy soil. So really, anytime I see these on the trail, it's usually in the the more exposed, more like areas where you're really sweating, the sun's really beating down on you. The leaves are arranged alternately. It's one of our terms. The shape is said to be lanceolate, and the margins are toothed or serrated. And so Yerba Santa has this really thick. They're really thick, and they have a dark green color, and they're really leathery in texture. And if you feel them, if you put your fingers on them, you'll note that both on the underside they're a little bit fuzzy, because they do have these soft hairs on the bottom, and then on the top side they can be really sticky, because they have a resin coating, and actually sometimes that resin coating collects dust and so they'll look really dirty. This is a plant that we'll utilize in in an ethnobotanical course. You can chew it. It's really interesting because when you do chew it, it turns into like the consistency of chewing gum, and it has like it has an odd, unique, distinct flavor that a lot of people don't like it. I personally like it, but yeah, it's always a challenge to find like a nice clean leaf that doesn't have like a bunch of dust attached to it. Yerba Santa also has this just amazing aromatic quality. They smell amazing. They have beautiful purple flowers. So if we were out on the trail, there, and we were able to use our senses to experience this plant, this is one that would be really easy to identify just by the touching and the smelling and even the taste. Next is yucca. Man, I love this plant. Yucca is like, I could do a whole program on yucca. It is such an amazing plant. It is a like an evergreen. It is evergreen. It's a shrub-like perennial, so it does live year-round. These have like such a so unique lifestyle. So they live for anywhere between like a decade or two, and they only flower once. So once this plant flowers and gives away its seeds to the world, it does die. And so general appearance, like they basically look like a big porcupine. There's nothing else that looks like it up in the mountains. So this one's a really easy one to spot. You want to be careful when you're hiking near this because it really does have these really sharp tips. And so this plant, the leaves are really slender. They're like gray green. They're long and they radiate out from the center. As I mentioned, it flowers once. So when that flower stalk first appears, it just looks like a giant asparagus. In that state, it is edible. As mentioned before, like, always abide by rules, but this is definitely not a plant that should be harvested only by the indigenous, because, since it reproduces once in its life, if you take it out, then this plant is not reproducing. But anywho, yeah, the flower stalk can be eaten. It could either be eaten raw or roasted, and that was something that Chumash did. And once it sprouts, it puts out these beautiful white flowers, and those are both edible raw or they can be cooked. I attended this amazing workshop with the Tataviam tribe and the Chia Collective, and we got to make pickled yucca flower, and we got to make like yucca flower tacos, and it was just such an amazing experience. But yeah, they're really delicious. And so essentially, the yucca plant is it also has this unique symbiotic relationship with this yucca moth, and that's a whole nother really awesome fact about this plant. When it sprouts to when it's adult, it basically looks the same, only it just really changes by size. And then finally, once it's given the seeds, and the entire plant dies back, and this is what it looks like. So it does have a lot of different looks to it throughout its life cycle. And I see that we're at 44 minutes, so I'm gonna start to rush. I could just talk on forever about plants. All right, my bad. California wild rose. So plants have families, and so this is in the rose family, and so not something I'm getting into now, but learning to identify plant families is a great skill because it can really help you to identify plants. So this is another one that doesn't necessarily look like a lot of other things up in the mountains. Its most obvious indicators are the thorns. The flowers have 5 petals. Other rose family plants are Toyon. That doesn't look too much like its wild rose cousin, but blackberry is also in the rose family, and that can be identified by the thorns as well. Next up, we have white sage. White sage is a shrub that grows 3 to 6 feet tall. It has the whitish gray leaves. The leaf margin appears to be entire. So remember I said entire is when it's just completely smooth and uniform. But if you actually, get up close to the white sage leaf and you look at it, or like you bring out your loom, your magnifying glass, you will see that the edges are actually they're toothed, or they're like tiny though, but it is slightly toothed or serrated. When this is growing, fresh leaves can be a little sticky, and it does have a unique aroma. I kind of feel like it smells somewhat of like body odor, but yeah, this is another one that you can really different, that really sticks out. And so I know for like with a lot of our youth programs, our naturalists in training, they often struggle with differentiating between the different sages, and so those were one of the key indicators of how to like differentiate white sage from like a purple sage or a black sage. This plant is drought deciduous, and so it will drop some or all of its leaves in the summer. And I will say that sages are in the mint family, and so a cool characteristic of mints is they have these like a square stem, and so that's another cool way to like differentiate. So in the mint family is also the horehound, and so if you're out on a hike, really put your finger around the base of the stem, and you can feel around, and you'll feel that square shape. Poison oak. All right. If there's like one plant you need to know when out on the trail, it's poison oak. It's basically, the saying is leaves of 3, let it be. So poison oak is a perennial. It grows both as a woody vine, but it can also grow as a shrub. It's all over Temescal, but I don't want to scare you away from going to Temescal. But it's really, it's a trickster because it can grow along the ground as a creeping vine. You see it climbing up trees, or you see it as compact bushes. And so it does make it tricky to avoid, because sometimes you can be like stretching out and reaching up, and if you're not paying attention, potentially your hand is sticking up into poison oak. But it does have leaflets, so each one of these is not. This whole thing is a leaf, and so it has these 3 leaflets, and they do have these. They are lobed, and they come in depending on the time of year. They change color. So in the early spring, they're like a fresh kind of red or pink color, and then as they mature, they become really glossy and green. And then towards the fall, they start to change color, and then they drop their leaves. And the thing about poison oak is the oils that they contain in their stems and leaves. And so that's why you don't want to go near this plant, because if you make contact with it, either directly or if your dog runs into it, which is why you should always keep your dog on a leash at the park, or if it's on your clothing, it'll stick there, and if it gets on your skin, it will give you a pretty gnarly rash. So you want to watch out for that. And then there is a big danger of this to our fighter fighters. When this does ignite, those volatile oils are present in the smoke, and they can be inhaled and cause damage to the lungs. They can also be absorbed through the pores. But this is poison oak, and so even when it does shed its leaves, there is also the possibility of you getting the oils from the stems. Mugwort, another great perennial herb. It has a very distinct aroma, so I could like blind identify this just by its smell. Other things about it are it's dark green on top and it's white underneath, and it's covered with soft hairs. The leaf shape is elliptic, and it divides into like little segments, or pinnate segments. Newer leaves on the top are more narrow or lanceolate, and margins are toothed. And you'll find mugwort basically riparian zone, shady areas. Basically, it likes to grow where poison oak grows. Coast live oak. Coast live oak so we have two main species of oak that we have in the Santa Monica's are valley oak and coast live oak. And the way to differentiate coast live oak is an evergreen. So that means its leaves it keeps its leaves throughout the year. They're thick, they're glossy, they're dark green, they're oval shaped. They can be convex, so they've got like this kind of almost cup-like feature to them. So if like you look at the top, it's like it is convex versus the bottom. You can see how it's just kind of concave, and then the leaf margins are they are serrated. They have these like sharp little points. So that's a good way to differentiate the coast live oak from the valley oak. And here's the valley oak leaves for comparison. And valley oak also sheds its leaves. Prickly pear cactus. This one's like super easy also because it's another plant that just kind of sticks out, and there's nothing really else that looks like it. I know it as nopal. It's one of those standalones in the chaparral. The pads grow in clusters. They're pretty flat and oval, broad. They're thick and fleshy, full of water. And so what's cool is that the pads are actually the stem of the plant, and the spines are specially adapted leaves. And so in this case, the stem, aka or the pad, aka the stem, is where photosynthesis is happening. And then they put out these delicious fruits. It flowers in the spring and has these fruit in the fall. Finally, there is the elderberry species. This is a tall, deciduous shrub. It kind of varies. I've seen these all over the place. Like I've seen them in Malibu Creek where they really are deciduous and they shed like all of their leaves. I've also seen them at places like Vista Hermosa Natural Park in downtown LA, and I've seen them like along the edge of the LA River where like they pretty much keep their leaves year round. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but they typically grow from 15 to 20 feet. I have seen them where they've been manicured in landscapes and they really look more like a tree. And the leaves are compound and they divide into a lot of little leaflets. And then the margins are serrated. And this will put out like white flowers from March to July. And then they start to fruit into the late summer. So right now, I haven't been out on the trail for a while, but I imagine they're either covered in green to blue fruit. This is a great both medicinal and edible plant, but do your research for obviously follow the rules. If it's like on a public, along the bike path at the LA River, it's harvesting that is one thing as opposed to taking it from the Santa Monica Mountains in a park with rules. But definitely you don't ever want to harvest or ingest when these are unripe because it can be toxic. And even when they are ripe, although they are safe, it is recommended that they be processed, that they be cooked. But yeah, do your homework, do your research, and products derived from elderberry can be found like at your local pharmacy. And so those are just some of the plants. And there are field resources that you could take. So, you could take all of that home and really apply yourself and learn, or you could satiate that American desire for quick and easy. And so iNaturalist has developed this really cool additional app that is really awesome. So I'll just play this video, but essentially this can help you identify the plant in real time. Awesome. So thank you for your time today. I hope that you are able to walk away from this presentation with some new insight and interest in enriching your hiking experience by discovering native plants through some of these identification methods that I've shared today. Please hike responsibly and take good care of yourself. And I will guess I'm gonna take a few questions. Okay, how do I end this? No, stop sharing. Okay. Hello?
Hey, Julio.
Cool. Okay.
We've got a few
Awesome.
questions coming in.
Okay, cool. So, how can you tell the difference between Yerba Santa and California sage? So California sage, or so the sages are in the mint family. So if you start from the stem, it has a more square-shaped stem that is an indicator of that. Just you can start there, and then you can look at the margins and the size of the leaves. A sage, like for example, a black sage, the margins, whereas with the Yerba Santa, the margins are toothed. Depending on the sage, the margin is more lobed. The surface is also a lot different. Both are can be dark green and leathery, but the Yerba Santa tends to be a lot wider than like a black sage is. I'm saying black sage because that's the one that I really know, and they look similar. And then also by knowing the difference between like those two plants and the family, it's really obvious when you look at the flowers, the way they're arranged side by side. Yucca only blooms once and they can't reproduce again. No more seeds after that. Correct. So yes. So it is a long-lived species. Anywhere from like I've heard different numbers, like anywhere from like somewhere 10 to 20 years, and then once it puts out that flower stalk, if you pay attention, you'll notice that not all of them, but all of those that are ready will bloom at the same time. It's really amazing how nature just synchronizes. And so they'll bloom at the same time, and they are pollinated by that one specific species of moth. And after pollination, they put out the seed pods, and those will be eventually dispersed by the wind. And then, yes, the plant completely dies off. So that's why it's important to not only even though I did mention that the flowers are edible and delicious, that's why it's important not to pick the flowers and eat them, not to collect seeds. And, really the only ones who can and should are indigenous people who are collecting the plant for their ceremonial purposes. Is it true that mugwort can ease poison oak rash? That is something that I've heard of a lot. I know there's the common story that the Chumash, other indigenous tribes, they would rub the mugwort on the skin before going foraging, for example, in an effort to protect the skin from poison oak. But there's also accounts of poison oak being used for medicine or food. So a lot of this knowledge has been lost. So we really don't know. I personally never had a poison oak rash, and while I am curious, I'm not really willing to test it out and then go apply mugwort. But there are a lot of accounts of that. So I can neither confirm nor deny. And as curious as I am, I'm okay living in the mystery. Let me see. Are there any field guides that you recommend? Um, like any of like these like, you know, plastic laminated guides are really cool. So for me, my big thing is I love ethnobotany and any plants that are usable. I used to teach wilderness survival skills, and so I really focus on the plants that you can use. And so, like for me, I don't, not that I don't care, but I'm not as interested in the pretty plants or the plants that are just known for their flowers. So that's why something like this that has a key about flowers is something that would be useful to me since I'm not as knowledgeable about flowers. A cool book that I love that I definitely recommend is Guide to Wild Foods and Useful Plants by Christopher Nierges. This is an amazing book. I love reading this. I love using it as a reference for programs and just for my own personal life. With the natives that I grow in my garden or whenever I'm doing things with plants for fun on my own. But yeah, this is another great book that I recommend. And finally, again, iNaturalist. It's an amazing app. You get to contribute to community science. If you don't know what iNat is, check it out. And I love it. I like just collecting observations. It's fun. It can become addictive. Yes, iNaturalist is an app, and Seek is also an app that's a companion to iNaturalist. What other plant programs webinars do you put on? Yeah, I would say follow Community Nature Connections website or social media platforms, and that's where we advertise everything. Hopefully, we can start doing this in person. And then, what time is it?
We could take a couple more and stay on until 3:10 or so.
Okay, so some of the more technical questions, we could share a copy of this PDF. So if you want to, there's a lot of questions asking about the terms and the difference. So the PDF will be shared with you, so you could get all of that and reference all of those terms and pictures. I lost my place. Where can we find these native plants? I did mention Temescal Gateway Park. It's an MRCA park. But a really cool thing. I'm not sure where all of you are coming from, but MRCA also has these like natural urban parks. So there is Vista Hermosa Park in downtown Los Angeles, which is really cool. It's like you're in downtown LA, but you feel like you're like dropped right into the Santa Monica Mountains when you go into this little tiny 10-acre park. There's also Lewis McAdams along the LA River, as well as a lot of these pocket parks. There's Compton Creek Natural Park. That's in the city of Compton, along the Compton Creek. I believe it's behind Washington School. You could look up the LA Conservation Corps, but that's another MRCA park in partnership with LACC, and that's also planted with a lot of these native species, so you don't have to make that huge trip to the Santa Monica or San Gabriel Mountains. Let's see, is it worth it to get certified as a California naturalist? That is a great final question. Absolutely. I feel I'm very proud of my CalNat certification. I feel like it really rounds off, especially if you're doing this for a profession, definitely, it really builds your resume. It's an amazing program that helps to build up your knowledge. Absolutely, and that's great that you asked that because we are offering, and it is about to sell out. I think we have about 2 or 3 spots left. 1 spot. Oh, so Wendy, you better get on it. But I think that's about it. But yeah, feel free to email me. Are you sharing that? I'm assuming so, right?
Email in the follow-up email out to everybody, along with the slides and also a recording of this training.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll see you at the next one. Have a great afternoon.